This week on Arizona Illustrated, an attempt to harness the power of the internet to understand and treat Alzheimer's. A look back at Arizona's Rough Riders, alt classical do-it-yourself chamber music, and the Chicago Music Store. Welcome to Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. More than 500,000 Americans will develop Alzheimer's disease this year. 5.3 million Americans have the disease, and by 2050 that number will more than double. And yet it's the only cause of death in the top 10 in America that cannot be prevented, cured, or even slowed. There is a collaborative effort right here in Arizona that's attempting to understand and treat Alzheimer's disease and other brain disorders, and they're asking millions of people to help out.
Wayne, come on, we're going to watch Jeopardy.
All right.
Actually, we're going to watch.
He was just fascinating. He's had such a fascinating career in Hawaii, in broadcasting, in government, and in the scientific research area. But one of the things that was really significant to me was he believed in me. At that time in my life, I didn't know there was anything to believe in.
Peggy Collins married the man who believed in her, Wayne Collins, in May of 1983. For more than 3 decades, they shared an adventurous life. But today, their world is much smaller than it used to be.
TV for 1,000.
The formal diagnosis was 2 years ago in January. Prior to that, there are symptoms, there's signs, and a lot of it is hindsight. The big one was when he didn't remember that Becky and Monty had moved to Oregon. They were our next door neighbors. We'd been friends with Becky for 20-some years, and actually introduced Monty and Becky to each other. And 2 weeks later, he wanted to know when they were going to come back. I said, well, they moved, they won't be coming back. And that was, for me, a kind of an aha moment.
A neurologist diagnosed Wayne with Alzheimer's disease.
Right. Come sit.
Alzheimer's damages and destroys brain cells, robbing its sufferers of their memories and eventually their lives. It affects about 120,000 Arizonans and more than 5 million people nationwide.
As a news broadcaster, the picture on the wall in the studio in Honolulu has a plaque, a picture there, and a plaque that says he never used a script. He memorized the stuff. Now, we have to go through every morning what we're going to do today, and that can happen several times. Because you didn't write down yet what we had for lunch, right?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so get to that point. And age-old favorite, peanut butter and jelly.
And I'm going to write down peanut butter and jelly for what? For lunch?
Yep.
You will forget more things as you get older. Most of us do. We forget where we left our keys. We might have trouble finding where we parked our car, but we don't forget that we drove a car. That might happen in Alzheimer's disease.
Memory researcher Betty Glisky says Alzheimer's is still poorly understood. It's also difficult to diagnose, in part because it's hard to distinguish from normal aging at its earliest stages.
Because of the variability in normal aging, this is a difficult problem. And because we don't see the cognitive symptoms until the pathology in the brain has developed to an extent enough to see these kinds of problems, then it's difficult to treat because we can't treat it early enough.
To learn what's normal and what's not, Glisky joined a cross-disciplinary team of researchers from the University of Arizona and the Translational Genomics Research Institute in Phoenix to create a new kind of memory test, a website called MindCrowd.
MindCrowd is our new approach to studying the human race. We're essentially trying to better understand how our brains work as humans using the internet.
Geneticist Matt Hunnelman started MindCrowd using online crowdsourcing as his model. Instead of asking visitors for funding or new ideas like other crowdsourcing sites, MindCrowd asks them to test their brains.
So this measures your reaction time, your reaction speed, as well as gets you focused on the test. With the pink ball test, you're just hitting enter. So we're truly measuring the hardwiring of your eyes to your brain to your finger muscle, essentially. We tell you that you're going to get word pairs, and you're going to see them first. You have to make a new association between the word pairs. And then we're going to show you one word pair, and you have to type the other one. It only takes about 10 minutes to go from start to finish. And we study episodic memory. This is memory that is really, really important for our daily life. It's one of the first memories that's affected with Alzheimer's disease.
The test also asks people about themselves and filters out questionable results and cheaters who take the test more than once. The idea is to learn how healthy people of different ages and backgrounds perform on the test in order to explore the full range of what's normal and to see how that changes as we age.
One of the big things that we're trying to learn here is a better understanding of what makes you an outlier. So for example, for a given age, let's take a 50-year-old. If you perform just like any other 50-year-old on the test, that's one thing, that's very interesting. But what if you perform like a 20-year-old? What if you perform at the test at the same level that the average 20-year-old performs? We want to know more about you. We want to know about your genetics. So are there interesting changes in your genetics, in your DNA, in your genome that are maybe enhancing your performance on this test? And that's really important because if we can find those regions in the genome that are important for performance, those are new regions that we could use to perhaps develop new drugs for Alzheimer's disease.
The next phase of the MindCrowd project will bring genetic testing into the mix. More than 50,000 people have taken the test so far, and Hundelman is hoping for 1 million before this phase is through. But he acknowledges that even if he meets his goal, turning his results into new treatments is a long way off.
For the families today struggling with Alzheimer's disease, their caregivers and the patients, it's more about a legacy project. It's more about, what can I do today to be a part of the research into the disease? I see my grandfather suffering with the disease, but I feel helpless. What can I do? How can I participate? This is one way.
Peggy Collins sees promise in the research, but she knows it will come too late for Wayne.
I'm very excited that there's research out there and there may be hope for my children and my grandchildren. At the same time, for me personally, I don't care because it doesn't affect me. You're not going to come in today and say, oh, here, give them this pill and everything will be back to normal. That's not going to happen. I try to focus that this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Not this is it. This is what I'm supposed to do. There's other things later, but those are later. And right now, this is what's important. Have a good nap, okay?
Okay, I'll try to behave.
All right.
To participate or learn more about this project, visit mindcrowd.org. In 1898, the United States declared war on Spain for sinking the battleship Maine in Cuba's Havana Harbor. Arizona was not even a state yet. The territory and its residents were thought of as uncivilized by the politicians in the East. So when President William McKinley called for a cowboy cavalry from the Western Territories, Arizonans seized the opportunity to demonstrate their passion and commitment to join the Union. They were the first to report to duty, and their performance under future President Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt would play a crucial role in shaping Arizona history.
We've all heard of the Rough Riders and their connection with former President Theodore Roosevelt during the Spanish-American War. The iconic image of Teddy Roosevelt charging up San Juan Hill is part of our national heritage. But less known is the story of how the Rough Riders got started by a group of Arizona cowboys, most from Prescott. They were led by a Prescott man by the name of Alexander Brody.
And he suspected or assumed that the President of the United States, McKinley, would call for volunteers as they did in the Civil War. So he came up with the idea of a regiment from Arizona composed of cowboys, of course himself as a colonel, and he made this public on February 22nd, 1898, which was the first public announcement of any volunteer regiment. Roosevelt had nothing to do with that at all. All that was done completely away from any of Roosevelt's influence, or probably even knowledge, really.
Originally, Arizona was allocated 170 men for the Rough Riders on April 26, 1898. That number grew to 200 by May 4th of that year when the men gathered in front of the bandstand in Prescott for a grand send-off. The men were given a mascot, a mountain lion named Josephine.
They had a little ceremony in the town plaza, and the troops marched in from Fort Whipple, or Whipple Barracks, and they lined them up there in the plaza, and it was cold. It snowed the night before. This is May the 3rd. The governor came up, Governor McCord, gave them a flag, which they carried through the campaign. It became their regimental flag.
They then boarded a train headed to San Antonio for training, where the troops were bolstered to a total of 255 men.
Most of them had very little military experience, although New Mexico had a lot of National Guardsmen in it, and so did Oklahoma. Arizona had very few. They were an older group. The Arizona men were about 28 years of age. Some had served in the regular army. They were intelligent. They were very dedicated. They were also hard to deal with because they were individualistic. So you had to have good officers that could handle the individuality of these men. But they were very aggressive, very intelligent, had extremely high morale. Part of that was due to Roosevelt's influence. They were good, and they knew they were good.
The next stop for the Arizona Rough Riders was Tampa, Florida, the departure point for Cuba. Not all the men could go to Cuba because of a lack of transportation. One entire troop of 85 men, plus 21 others from 2 other Arizona troops, stayed in Tampa. The first battle for the Rough Riders, who despite their name fought on foot, was the skirmish at Las Guasimas on June 24.
Newspapermen said he was ambushed. Well, they weren't ambushed at all. They knew exactly where the Spaniards were. The Spaniards were waiting for him. And actually, it was a Rough Rider who fired first, fired the first shot. Saw a Spaniard and took a shot at him, and then all hell broke loose. It was a serious little battle. Arizona, there were 2 Arizonans killed. Lasted about 3 hours on June 24th.
Round them up. Yeah, round them up.
The next battle is the most famous, the Battle for San Juan Heights, usually referred to as the Battle for San Juan Hill.
The Rough Riders then went first up Kettle Hill, and then they crossed a little valley and up on San Juan Ridge. San Juan Hill was captured by American Infantry Division to their left. It was a nasty battle. This was not a comic opera affair. The Spaniards had Mauser rifles. They were well-trained soldiers, experienced soldiers. They could fire those Mausers very rapidly, and they put down a pretty good volume of fire on the American forces. Arizona lost 9 killed and I believe 24 wounded in those 2 engagements.
The most well-known Arizona incident was when former Prescott Mayor Bucky O'Neill was killed by a Spanish bullet. That was something he allegedly said would never happen. Herner says he confirmed in an interview with the last surviving Arizona Rough Rider Arthur Tuttle that O'Neill never said that.
Tuttle was about 15 feet away from him, from Captain O'Neill when he was shot. And he said he was talking to a regular Army officer, and then he turned as the conversation ended and was hit in the mouth and went down. But he said he didn't say anything about a Spanish bullet being molded that will never kill Bucky O'Neill.
This is an authentic Rough Rider's uniform made from yellow canvas. The shirt is blue wool. It was worn by George Truman, the only Rough Rider from Pinal County. Margaret Truman Baker is his granddaughter. She never knew her grandfather. He died in 1929, but she knows about his time as a Rough Rider. Baker was from New York and came to Florence in 1890, following family that had arrived earlier.
He was one of the very first to make it to the top of San Juan Hill. He was a track star, I think, back in his private academy at home, and so maybe he was a fast runner. The family told stories that he was right next to Roosevelt. Of course, the family was always very thrilled that he, was rubbed shoulders with someone who became so important.
Truman Baker says family lore is that Truman told Roosevelt to get off his horse to avoid being shot. He wrote letters home about the conditions faced by Rough Riders.
He talked about the diet, that they had the wrong kinds of food for that jungle environment, that it was very hot there, and a lot of mosquitoes, and very steamy, and they just had heavy potatoes and things to eat where they should have had, or they would have been better off to have lighter fare to eat.
For Truman and other Rough Riders, their time in Cuba was short. By August 15th of 1898, they were back in Tampa. Over the years, the Rough Riders kept in touch through reunions like this 50th reunion in 1948 in Prescott. Many of the men went on to positions of power in early Arizona. Brody had a close relationship with Teddy Roosevelt, who appointed him territorial governor of Arizona. Roosevelt Dam resulted from Brody's ties to the president. It may have also led to Arizona itself.
There's a good possibility that Arizona would have been joined with New Mexico as a state, except Brody convinced Roosevelt not to support that. Now, he couldn't convince Roosevelt to come out and support separate statehood, but he convinced him to stay neutral on the sidelines. And as a result of that, then finally, of course, when Taft became president, then Arizona got separate statehood.
Like what you see on Arizona Illustrated? Visit our webpage at azpm.org to watch and share videos from this episode. You'll also find stories from future programs, an easy way to submit your own story idea, an archive of past episodes of Arizona Illustrated, and you'll find everything you need to stay connected with public broadcasting in Southern Arizona. azpm.org. What happens when you combine composers with backgrounds in jazz, country, punk, cabaret, rock, and pop? Do-it-yourself alt classical music, of course, or in a word, Chamberlab.
The audiences really love it. We have audiences that normally go to classical concerts and don't normally go to clubs, and they have a lot of fun. And then we have the people that are out every night seeing live music anyway. They're going to be there. They're going to be hanging out, checking out bands. And now, boom, we've got a bassoon trio right in front of them, or we've got a brass ensemble. And they love it too because they're music lovers. And where they might not go out to see something at a concert hall, they'll certainly love it if you just drop it right down in front of their faces, you know, in the neighborhood, so to speak. My name is Chris Black, and I'm a composer and a performer living here in Tucson, Arizona. And I started and I'm running the Chamberlab concert music series. Chamberlab is a concert series of, I guess, what we could call alt classical. It's concert music, chamber music, that comes from composers like myself that aren't really a part of the classical world. And we're writing music for classical musicians who are a part of the classical world because they're really good. And then we're putting the shows on in venues that are not at all part of the classical world, such as the Rialto or the Club Congress and that sort of thing. We're bringing concert music into places more normally associated with rock or punk or country or jazz or cumbia. I absolutely seek out people from different backgrounds, especially with the composers. I'm looking for people that are like me from maybe a rock background or just sort of a DIY club background where we would normally play at Plush or at Congress or at something like that. I'm looking for those people that love concert music and can actually put notes on paper to write some, rather than being from sort of the established classical world, because there's just this huge barrier between classical world and all the other music in the world, whether it's rock or pop or anything. Classical is just behind this wall for some reason, and I don't think anybody likes that. Nobody likes that the wall's there, but it's there. So by grabbing a bunch of people from this side of the wall and hooking them up with all these other people from this side of the wall, everyone has a tremendous amount of fun, and it just brings a lot of strange new music into the world that way. I got our tuba player and our trombone player, who also plays sousaphone, and I put them together, and I had them play notes that were like that close together, so it was pretty dissonant. And then I got the other two trombone players and had them play notes that were that close together, so everything was very murky, and I had hoped very thick and strange and more of a physical impression than an actual tune that you would go home and hum. And then also, the exciting part was we had all this orchestral percussion back there. We had the big bass drum, we had the vibraphones and timpani and all that, and I said, well, I'm going to write a bass drum solo to put in the middle of here. Right about the middle, I just had this kind of this rhythm part in the trombones and tubas going, and they just repeated that. And then the bass drum player just cut loose. Boom, boom, and made big sounds. Also had a timpani solo in there where he was changing the pitch of the timpani as he was rolling it with the foot pedals. So it would go, and I just really had fun making sound with that one. There wasn't really anything that you were going to go home and go, remember that? There was no real melody that stood out. I just wanted to make this thick batch of sound. And it worked out. It worked out really well. I decided I wanted to find a new place to live. I went out on the road by myself and toured, and every time I came through Tucson, I had an amazing time and I met incredible people. And the reason that I stayed here is because it really feels like Austin felt in about 1988. It's laid back, it's super cheap to live, and there's just talent everywhere. There's all kinds of artists, not only musicians, but painters and writers and chefs and dancers, and we're all sort of in the neighborhood. Everything's really close together, particularly downtown. It's just an amazing place to be where you can put together projects like this just by walking up the street for a little bit and saying, hey, do you want to do a thing? Hey, what about you? You want to do a thing? Hey, do you want to paint for this? Do you want to cook some food? You're a chef. And just get things together. It's very easy.
Chamberlab will be performing what they describe as the work-in-progress choose-your-own-adventure story entitled Everything Happens for a Reason. That's Saturday, May 9th at 8 p.m. at Hotel Congress. Admission is free. Everyone has their own special place, somewhere where you can be yourself. Now, for some, it's a serene space allowing for solitude and reflection. For others, it's the hustle and bustle of busy streets. For Jim Sauer, it's the confines of a longtime business in downtown Tucson.
Buildings are acts of collaboration. The owners, designers, builders, and users all contribute to the building. With a historic building, such as the Chicago Music Store at 130 East Congress Street, the list of collaborators grows very long. This building, on the corner of 6th Avenue and Congress Street, was built in 1903 to house the Los Angeles Furniture Company. The two longest tenured owners have been the J.C. Penney Company from 1927 to 1957 and the Chicago Music Store, who have been there since 1967. It was J.C. Penney that combined two buildings to create the current one. You can see evidence of this combining by looking at ceiling beams, window patterns, and the angle of the original pressed tin ceiling tiles. The last 15 years have seen a new ceiling structure, removal of decades-old paint from tile work, a listing on the National Register of Historic Places, and a general overhaul of street facades. There's a lot to love about this building. There are the quirky bits, the balcony that runs along the north wall that is so short I need to tilt my head, the partial basement, the not quite square angle where the walls meet, reflecting the angle of our downtown streets. There are also the grand gestures of the building, the nearly 30 feet of open air from the ground floor to the skylights, the hierarchy of stairways, the generous ceiling height in the mezzanine, the shaded terrazzo-tiled front porch that is a gift back to the community, allowing for comfortable window shopping and creating a performance space for local musicians. While I admire the history on display here, I also see vast potential in this building. Skylights could be reopened and more windows put in, including the return of the storefront windows along 6th Avenue. The wonderful spaces of the mezzanine and second floor could again be fully open to customers. The Chicago Music Store makes me grateful for the efforts of everyone who worked together across time to create it. It also makes me hopeful that it will continue to receive love and attention so it can evolve, grow, and continue to serve the needs of our community.
Thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. Next week, we celebrate mothers by going fast, training hard,
Get the knee in between him and you.
and creating a more beautiful and interesting world. I'm Tom McNamara. See you next week.